Alright, programs. Time to start pulling it all together. We're going to change the order a little bit to follow more the software layout than the pyramid at this point. The pyramid is laid out to show dependencies, but this will make more sense when you see it. Let's talk about some of the program details first. You can use any bridge filter from the bridge list to limit the bridges which you will be considering. Remember that more bridges has a multiplicative effect on the optimization time. You also have the option to apply a structure weight formula. There's an example one based on deck areas, but you can write a formula based on, say, distance to the legislature or the governor's house if you would like. However you'd like to weight the importance of the structures. Then you will need to set the years of your program on this screen. Again, multiplicative effect. The Fed's asset management rule talks about a 10-year horizon, but when you're just setting it up for testing purposes, you'll probably want to use something smaller like 2 or 3 years just to see results that it gives back. And then finally we have the required minimum cost. We recommend that you start by setting a value in here, in this required minimum cost, before playing with the action minimums. If you set a threshold of $50,000, then projects less than $50,000 will not be recommended by the optimizer. Next, the configuration data. The NBI deterioration method is where you will choose if future NBI values should be based off the element deterioration plus the NBI conversion or on NBI deterioration curves. If you choose to use the converter, you will need to pick the conversion profile. And remember that we find the FHWA standard to be very aggressive about small amounts in condition state 4. Using the residual health index approximation can significantly reduce the calculation time. In some cases we found that to be up to 40%, and only comes up with about a 5 to 10% loss in the accuracy for life cycle values. It's a nice shortcut for speeding up calculation if you can accept that kind of change in accuracy. The long-term analysis period is probably the single largest influencing factor on run times. How long do you want to include in your life cycle calculation? Less than 30 years will give wildly different answers, and more than 75 years results in an almost imperceptible change in accuracy. That's why we set the default at about 50 years. Beyond 75 doesn't provide a lot of value. Then you pick which network policies you're going to include in your analysis. And then we connect the utility profile that we set up, the utility weight profile that we set up earlier. Remember, this is the mask that temporarily reweights our utility tree. And finally, we attach which subdivision profile we want to use and which segments of that subdividing profile we want to include for analysis. These groups will be the groups that our performance measures and funding will be based on. We'll talk about that actually next. Performance measures. Performance measures are the types of data you would like to track through the course of the optimization for analysis after. Utility is a fixed performance measure since optimization is done in terms of cost-benefit using utility for the benefit measurement. But you also have the option to add these default performance measures, any of these ones that are built into the software. And if you'd like, you could track other database fields, though you'll only see changes to them if the benefits affect them. You can also add targets, which the optimizer will strive to meet, or you can add minimum thresholds, where the optimizer won't recommend solutions if they don't meet that minimum threshold. So for example, you can say don't return a solution that has a health index average less than 50. If you do not have sufficient funding to meet those minimum targets, the minimum thresholds, then the optimizer will let you know that as well. And then let's talk about funding allocation. You can tie a program's funding to the funding sources mentioned earlier, though this isn't required. And in hypothetical programs, this probably isn't recommended. You don't want to tie them to your funding sources until you're sure that that's where the money is coming from, if you want it for tracking purposes. For quick setups, then you can also just enter an amount and distribute it evenly across all of the years. Or you can enter funds specifically by setting a funding for each specific year. You can also get the current performance of each segment for your subdivision and distribute the funding based on its initial performance. In this case, if the non-NHS is further from its targets, it would get more of the funding for all of the years of our analysis. Alright, next we will be talking about optimization.